So we've got a new workplace. We've got people actually working remotely, working out of cafes, people working out of home. And so let's think about what's changed. One is that remote working, and the second thing is this massive increase of cybercrime. Now, in some ways, why is it going to get worse in this area? One is IoT, which we're going to have a look at. And one is this is the sort of the general figure that people think about, is that the threat actors, this spend on cyber attacks is estimated about $1 trillion a year. And Accenture came up with a figure that if you added up all of this spend on cyber defense, it's about 986 billion according to their calculations. I don't know where they get the 86 from, but that's about the thing. So it's about a 1 to 10 spending ratio. And I've just put this on point of view because actually we are getting better, and if you can see the 2018 thing, some of these targeted attacks, actually they're sort of slightly to fall a bit because we've got a lot better at our defense. But that doesn't mean that people actually go for the perimeter in future. So let's talk about the dangers of shadow IT. All right. So this was a very interesting survey that came out earlier this year. But these are what's in a typical day of what's connecting to to your network through enterprise networks. And this is 39% is the social media sites, unapproved apps, 19%, etc., and 7% downloading videos. So if you think about that, it's on a typical day, companies in the USA, Germany, and things on this particular survey, which was done by Infoblox, is that 33% had 1,000 shadow IT devices connected, all right? And 12% of them had 10,000 IoT devices connected. Now, from that point of view is that we don't have ability when people, let's say, running at home to decide on which IoT devices they actually decide to connect. So we have the common devices connected are 40% of fitness trackers, 47% digital assistants like Alexa, smart TVs, kitchen devices, and gaming console, the famous sort of smart kettle, which isn't very smart because it doesn't actually figure out that it's got no water in it, so you can start a fire if you start switching it on. So they're not that smart. Yeah, but you've got a lot of people who actually are then accessing the network, accessing the company network. You say, well, hang on, we've got two-factor authentication, fine if you've got it. But a lot of people don't. And the argument we had beforehand about having it is absolute paramount, because it's very easy to load some key logging software into, down, etc., through one of these devices, actually figure out what people are doing, and then, in fact, then get access. So, and a lot of this stuff you guys will probably already know, all right? So excuse me if I'm things, but remember I'm a CEO, I'm not a CISO like you guys are, all right? But is it difficult to find these devices? One are vulnerable. You've got IoT search engines out there which are free, you can pay for. And I had quite a lot of fun actually looking at what I could actually access the other day on Showdown. And so you're searching for things that detect devices that are connected to the network. It's obviously very useful for pen testing, etc., and looking at it, but also for hackers. So they can, you can look at business networks, surveillance cameras, industrial control systems, and I was having sort of decided to actually use it, and I was looking at this German family in their home that was through things quite easily, having a look at that, which is in fact a privacy issue which they hadn't got connected. That was easy to do. And then I thought about PLCs. What about looking at machines? So first of all, this is free, or you can pay for the upgraded version. But I was looking at industrial control, so I thought actually having a look at this Siemens plant. I've actually got a geolocation of what this plant is, and I can look at those. But it's also giving you a whole list of admin routers and things that you can actually go in that we talked about beforehand. So it's actually incredibly easy for people to discover these particular RIMs. So in a fix is our control. Now there's lots of very clever bits of software we've talked about doing these things. But really it's never going to be completely in control. And of course we also know that there are backdoors in a lot of IoT devices. And that's sometimes for a good reason of being able to sort of upward the firmware and other elements that are required on the devices. But those things that are found, some of that backdoors are actually badly protected. So even if you as a professionals are actually saying what the policy should be, you're not necessarily controlling what they might decide to buy on Amazon, which is for a price. So the IT answer to most of these things is, we heard about it beforehand, as a policy for connected devices. And so you issue out a policy, which the lawyers are happy that you've sent out a policy. But on this particular survey, 82% of the companies surveyed said they had introduced a policy. Right? 20% of the staff of the UK companies ignored the policies. Right? So they did it, and you had about 20% of the staff in the UK and USA reported full compliance. So the point is that a policy is a sort of an argument of legal covering to say that we've issued a policy, but the actual trying to make it comply is another matter. Therefore, these below-radar connected devices pose a real threat. And so a lot of the things we talk about, if we're actually working within our work environment, it is a lot easier. I used to be, I was talking to another gentleman here, the chairman of a company called Stephenson, which also had the office of the Paymaster General there. We processed £3.2 trillion of business payment out to the armed forces. Everything else was coming through there. So the security elements in that company that we had was a major, major issue. And you always were, as chairman, I was always aware that sometime I'd get in the middle of things as a major data breach, as a major issue. But we had lots of levels of protection, lots of actually observation, particularly about people. You know, we actually had to monitor those people and see whether they're developing gambling habits or anything else, and we had lots of things, and they had to sign up to that because it's all the people side where a lot of these things actually go wrong. So, but now we've got everybody working in different ways. We've got them buying stuff that is not necessarily coming through approval. They're downloading stuff that isn't actually approved, and nor should they, because it's impossible to control that. And we talked beforehand about supply chain entry. Just look about this other point, and this one, I think someone mentioned this beforehand. This was, when they were just about to launch their TV satellite channel. It was on the day of launch, and this had been planned. So the attackers have been there for about sort of 7 months in there, identified 7 weaknesses in the system, and one of them was through the refrigeration contractor, which is an Italian refrigeration contractor. The other one was from a Dutch remote camera control. And so, as somebody was saying, just MOD guy, the last speaker was talking about, fortunately they had all their IT people on staff, and very quickly they just ripped the wires out the wall because they recognized what would actually happen. But they were down for months. They could only use fax machines. They didn't actually know what was infected. And months before they connected, it cost them $4.5 million in year 1 and $2.7 million two for the extra protection. But the whole way of operating as a business, they were not accepting feeds from anybody else from that time. They had to vet everything. So the problem when we work as businesses is that when we decide to contract with people, we aren't putting it through the lens of just how secure those particular vendors are and the suppliers and what their linkage is into it. It's something which people buy from people for commercial reasons, and I would say also from boards. We are not we're not making a lot of our decisions based upon whether this in fact affects our resilience or not enough in those decision making. And one of the missions that I think everybody in this room has got and everything else is actually to raise the whole awareness of the particular problem to the board level. It's not sufficient for the people on the board to say, well, I don't really understand that this is this area, because they have to, because it's probably the biggest risk that people have to their business. And the legal question, which was actually being asked, such ultimately businesses are responsible for security, all right? Now, the GDPR fines we were talking about, this is now becoming a business about, and we look at the Tesco fine, is that it depends upon how well you were protected and what actions you had taken beforehand to protect yourself. So the reason why Tesco got fined much more money was because they hadn't done enough in advance, they had prepared enough in advance. Now, I would love to believe this is going to change the climate, and I think that although that there's no legislation except in the regulated industries, but basically there is, I think this has the potential to change the climate with people realizing that if they have not or can't prove they've got all the right steps in place, that they may end up by paying a substantially higher fine of 2 or 3 times more hand. And it's actually starting to prove out in the various test cases that are going out there in the marketplace. So the FCO is doing it, the ICO is definitely doing it. So policy documents with acceptance log. What we advocate is that, we advocate that it's not sufficient just to put out policy docs. You actually want to know people have actually signed off and said, yes, I approve that, and have a permanent log of that. So you actually have that. That's very important for post-audit, to people saying, well, you've got a policy, but the court will tell you, saying, well, how do you know people actually read it? Did they accept it? Do you have a log of when they accepted it, when they did it? And we also have systems that will actually not only say if someone signed at the end, said I signed and understood it, but actually we know that they actually did read those pages and the dwell times on the pages and things, which in fact is quite useful. But date stamp confirmation is really important. But the other element that we were talking about over on our table, and I think it was the theme going through the room, was that it's the education of everybody. It's the education of the users. And we had that stat on there, where 86% of people in the room felt that was important of education. So our weakest point is somewhere on the perimeter, and our perimeter now is hugely different. So it's essential that we have ways of educating our users in a way that is constantly able to move to whatever the threats are. And that's about not just a one-off document you push out to them, that's actually got to be pushed out every month to remind them. Because we now have to raise the whole awareness of everybody in our organizations about security, which is something which they felt was just to do with a security team or a cyber team. And the documents also, because the threat will change, need to be updated. So, and we have to make sure that our view is that it's not sufficient to say to people, we've sent you a document, it's in Dropbox somewhere, can you put down it? That means they've got to go and pull it, right? So our belief is, one is it's got to be command and control, The document is sent to you, you have it, it's filed automatically, and therefore you can access it, and then if it's updated, you can file the update and it's always in the right place. Now, you probably guess now I'm talking about apps, okay, that actually do that, because the only way you can really file things properly is in fact on mobile devices or on things, but in apps, okay, so that they can actually get there. And that is not actually allowing them to have documents that are live documents like Word or something that may have some virus in there, but actually in a controlled way. So, and the latest version. So it's pushed and therefore not pulled by the users. So it's pushed into the right location. And also, we believe that you need to have this sort of ability to have compliance, so that you can have people can click on it after they've read the document and say, yes, I've complied, I've read this document, and you have evidence of it. Now, that doesn't mean that they are going to do it, but it gives you a better chance, okay? So, but I think that the whole thing about this creating a security culture is what we're fundamentally talking about. So everybody in the room are absolute specialists. You know this game completely. We have lots of our people in our organization of different experience and different skills. They are brilliant at those skills, but they really don't know jack shit about this stuff, okay? And so what we have to do is to actually raise that up across the whole organization. And so therefore what we do believe is that this is something which has to be a top priority, because we now have a different environment. So the apps need to have a reference library for all situations. Someone talked about playbooks, etc. And they can deliver regular push notifications. So the important thing about anything to do with apps die on your phone unless you actually are then continually being reminded and that what's going on there. So with certain consultants, we've said where they've created 52 messages for the year, which go out bang, bang, bang every week and ping people about what issues about how to protect themselves. And what over time these organizations are about raising people's awareness about things. So cyber is not the only game in town, and I think anything, if you're going to try to use it from a business point of view, and this is where I'm talking about a business point of view, is that we have to be able to have systems that are threat agnostic, whether it be cyber or whether it be all the other things that happen, terrorism, attack, fire, etc., and everything else. They all have sort of common characteristics, is that you have to be able to find out what the status is of things when they happen. And so one of our sort of beliefs is that you have to have an entirely independent, parallel communication system ready to go. Something that has not got any umbilical cord with your existing systems. So if you have to shut things down, you can keep people informed and keep people continually informed of and that would apply if you had a terrorist attack in London. And there are enough instances when people have been, whether it be in Paris or Brussels, when people have massive difficulty finding where the employees are, whether they're safe or not. And that's not acceptable today because the technology is there to make sure you can check in and out there. So whether it be a power outage might well be because they've got a major grid attack or cyber attack on that. And you do need to have the ability to communicate, and even if you lose your current systems. And of course, we are human, right? And we forget stuff. And computers are brilliant at doing at retaining information. So this is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. I've resurrected this guy who's the sort of a colleague of Freud and Jung. And he invented the learning curve. But before he invented the learning curve, he actually invented the forgetting curve. And the issue is you would sort of whiz up the classroom teaching and training. That's why we do so much training, right? But then, in fact, within days, all right, we start to forget stuff. And the problem is with things like crises or these things, is these are not happening every day of the week to people. These are rare events. So if in fact you come in and you say, I'm going to get someone to learn how to hoover this carpet, and we put them on a training course, and the next day their job is to continually hoover the carpet, they're going to know how to do it. All right? As it is, you take them to a training, this is how we're going to react, all right? And then in fact, they forget it, you retrain them again. Now you can do that with a smaller group of people, but not across your whole organization. It's just not practical. All right? So our view is that basically you want to be able to give people the ability, what are the 5 things you're supposed to do in this particular crisis? Those are the 5 things. Just happen. This is the playbook. You do the 5 things. So it's well known that 15% people in a crisis react in a positive way. They get into action. 15% run around absolutely crazy, go mad, lose their control, and the rest of the people generally freeze. So by giving them the things they need to do, right, means they move from that freeze state into moving in the right direction. And the only way you fill that human gap is by having on your device is saying, what am I supposed to do? Right? So the other thing is that there's been a tendency in the past for crisis managements to be within a very small team, right? And keep that things and just generally keep other people loosely informed. And I saw on one of the slides beforehand on that sort of dateline saying it's maybe talking to people in day 2 or things. But nowadays, life is so fast that the reputation that we talked about can be destroyed very, very quickly. And we've seen things like the United Airlines guy. The PR team didn't get to him fast enough to say, don't say this and don't say that. So everything takes on a news item so quickly. So we have to remember that all of the staff are now publishers. Everybody is. And if you harness them properly with a story, this is what's happening, and keep them fed, then in fact they become your republishers of what's really happening. If you don't do that, they'll pick up on whatever thread's happening on Twitter, and they will in fact then, the story will take momentum, and somebody who's actually working for GE said this, but they picked it up from some other source. It's got credibility because somebody said that. You can't afford that. So companies now have to think communications in a crisis. And remember, from that last presentation, if you see how much stuff is going on, how much stuff you've got to pay attention to in this team, how do you communicate? You've got to make it really simple to communicate to everybody. That's all the stakeholders. And you've got people like me, the CEO, saying, what's going on? I want to know. Give me information, which is a nightmare, because you're just trying to fix it. So be very wary of vacuums. You've got to keep people informed, and people will make their own stories up otherwise. So, yeah, you can say it's a really difficult game, okay? It's impossible to have 100 defense. We all know that, all right? And I was intrigued by somebody saying beforehand that, some of that story to say we can't defend it is actually being used to justify why spend the money. That's absolutely nuts, because you just have to reduce that impact. The impact of these things is so huge. And I think that's on one of the slides early on, I think it was your slide, I think you were talking about how that company's reputation, and we're thinking about they've gone back over years and years and years. And all those things they've gone through, the cyber impact has the ability to impact far higher than anything we've had in history. So it is actually the greatest risk that we face. Not all boards fully understand that, and that's the mission. But to do this thing, we've got to have good end user education. And I know that's not technology as such, etc., but you can use technology to deliver that. But it's absolutely essential, because that's the only way we're going to reduce the impact. The appropriate security policies. I heard beforehand we had this argument about dog 1, dog 2. There are dog lovers in here, no cat lovers, I noticed that. But there is this problem, which we have to think about, saying we are all human. So how do we actually figure that out? And I think there's no sympathy on our table for blaming the user, really, because we've got technology that can force strong passwords and two-factor authentication. We shouldn't be allowing that to happen for anybody in that position. But we do need to have the appropriate security policies that are not dreamt up and poured over by lawyers and made to page 57, etc. We need to have the ones that people understand. Okay? We obviously need good network defenses. We need to have good control over the devices, the asset management we talked about, etc. Intelligent DNS solutions. And with your permission, I'm just going to this is a mixture between ranting and talking about what we do. All right. And so if this...
We've always faced threats in one form or another, but they are always changing and evolving. Every organisation faces some level of risk from fire, cyber attacks, power outages, extreme weather, supply chain failure, terror, and any other threat to business as usual. These threats are increasing. Our organisations are more connected than ever before. Traditionally, organisations prepare for a potential incident by training staff, writing plans, and doing simulations. But how much do you remember from the last course you went on? A crisis can happen at any time. If it happens a year after your training, will you know what to do? Let's consider one of those. A cyber attack. How can Sentinel help? Without your servers, you will have no access to your documents. And without an independent communications channel, even sharing basic instructions can be a nightmare. At the beginning of any incident, Sentinel already has the documents you need in your hand and ready to go, even if your servers are down. Once you know what to do, you can use SMS, email, or in-app messaging to check first of all that everyone is safe with two-way polling. You can message everyone in your organisation in 60 seconds or less through the Broadcast Centre's independent comms channel. Sentinel's SIT feature, Secure Instant Teleconferencing, lets you set up a conference call instantly with no pins or dial-in numbers. After the dust is settled, Sentinel provides you with a post-incident log, so that after any crisis you can review how it was handled and learn from experience. Having Sentinel's independent communications channel, access to your vital documents, and conveniently grouped contacts, all hosted on a secure server architecture, gives you the flexibility to respond to any crisis.
I think I'll probably leave it there, Amar, because are you okay? I've got a few more slides to go through. And the reason why we developed Sentinel was because really just from our clients having incidents. And we had one particular client, who's the Queen's lawyers, who had an incident which they thought they were fully prepared for. And they spent a lot of money, just as we've heard. And they thought they were fine. And they called us in and they said, look, we thought we had all the processes, we had the recovery plans and everything else, but it was all over the place. We couldn't check where people were, we didn't know where our documents were, we couldn't access to all the contacts we need to call, all the companies we need to call. And so we did Sentinel for them, and then basically we thought this is something which is common across business. We're very good at making sure documents go on the right elements, we can see which groups go there. So I'll just summarize on what we do. I don't want to make this too much of a commercial, but it explains some of our thinking. And so we decided that, first of all, we had to make sure we could communicate. all right? And we had to basically get answers back, because it wasn't sufficient just to say there's a missile coming from North Korea to Hawaii, it's on its way. What am I going to do? And I break out the drinks cabinet? What's the it's probably the most sensible thing to do, by the way. Where's my shelter? What is it? So it's not sufficient, okay? But the second thing is you need to have two-way, and two-way communication using SMS, those people who know about it, is a bit of a train wreck around the world, because lots of countries just don't allow information come back from SMS. Japan, lots of other places around the world do not have that returning back certain telco. So we had to get a way of getting that back through the internet, and that's really important. Otherwise, you can't rely upon things because things are held up. The document center, we really thought that this ability to have different documents, different action lists, checklists to different people, so in groups, was really important. So you could have CEO would have, say, reactions to those done in advance. And it's really important to have an up-to-date directory. And we found actually with a lot of our financial services clients that they are using this every day, because this is their GDPR protected directory, which is fully up to date, where they just dial straight out for everybody. If they want the paralegal who's on the 4th floor, they're not going through the change, just calling him directly out of the app. And actually there's an advantage of having a crisis app that's actually really useful, because people, when it's ready to go, people aren't just suddenly discovering how it works. And you've got these action cards we talked about, ones that are interactive, so you can click it, and people see what you've done. The reason why we added secure instant teleconferencing as well as we've got in-app messaging, but really after a bit, threads and things become unmanageable. So what it is really you want, say, the top people just suddenly hit on a call, independent of every other system you've got, whether you've got VoIP, and then put people together and then they talk. And all those calls are recorded, and as everything's said on the video, everything is audited on one platform. So you can, if you end up in a coroner's court, you've actually got all the things you did in the whole thing. And then we've got lots of content stuff. And we've got things like mental health issues in there, which we've worked with NHS nurses in there, which is lots of videos in there, so people actually people are affected by impacts, etc., can access those things. And those are the sort of things you can do if you've got a library. So that's it, Amar. That's what I'm going to cover off there. I'm not going through individual points, but I'm coming it from a business owner and a business position, not thinking about just the cyber element of things. This has to come out of the silos. This is actually everything. This is about business, and it's about going to value. And we talked about that finance director that you had there calculating the amount that it's going to cost. Salespeople that don't understand what this really means when it goes off and they're not talking to their clients. Everybody has to be educated to the impact of cyber. Thank you very much.